The today's topic is neonatal cholestasis. What is neonatal cholestasis? The definition, it states that the conjugated or direct bilirubin concentration should be more than 1 milligram per DL or more than 20% of the total serum bilirubin. Now, this is as per the whole presentation has been prepared as per the Indian Academy of Pediatrics guideline for neonatal cholestasis. But after it has been formulated by IAP, there are certain other changes in a consensus guideline made by Espaghan and Naspaghan. There they have stated if any newborn baby after 14 days of life is having conjugated bilirubin or to direct bilirubin concentration more than 1 milligram per DL, irrespective of the total serum bilirubin, then this baby needs to be evaluated for neonatal cholestasis. So let's come to the causes. According to epidemiology, we know that 1 in every 2,500 infants in the West, it has been documented to have neonatal cholestasis of some sort of etiology. Now, in Indian scenario, from 8 tertiary care center, it has been prepared and it has been seen that an unknown etiology are two of the most common factors which has been found as the cause of neonatal cholestasis. So if we classify the etiologies grossly, it will be intrahepatic causes and extrahepatic causes. In the intrahepatic causes, mainly there is idiopathic neonatal hepatitis, sepsis by different bacteria like E. coli, Listeria, Staph aureus, Torches infection, and other viral infections like hepatitis B, C, and sometimes it is drug induced or toxin mediated. Total parenteral nutrition induced cholestasis is one entity which is coming more and more in attention as more of preterm babies are being delivered. So more prematurity and less birth weight are independent risk factors for developing cholestasis due to TPN therapy, especially if the TPN therapy is prolonged for more than 2 weeks. Certain trisomies like trisomy 21, trisomy 18, they can have cholestasis and conjugated bilirubin more than 1 milligram per DL even after 2 weeks of life, which is normal in that case. And if other etiologies are excluded, then this is to be considered as physiological for that trisomy. Now, certain endocrine factors like hormones, like growth hormone, cortisol, and TSH, these hormones are essentially for organogenesis and formation of the whole excretory tract of the liver. So, in case of hypothyroidism or hypopituitarism, the patient may present, the newborn may present with neonatal cholestasis along with other sine qua non features. Metabolic disorders are one group of disorders which can present with neonatal cholestasis. It may be of carbohydrate metabolism, it may be of amino acid, lipid, or peroxisomal disorders. Among the carbohydrate metabolism disorders, galactosemia is one of the most common etiology. If a newborn presents with lethargy, recurrent seizures, along with if ophthalmological examination reveals presence of cataract and MRI reveals presence of cerebral edema, it may indicate towards galactosemia. Hereditary fructose intolerance is one of the other etiologies which might be underestimated in our Indian scenario, because in rural areas it is a common practice of giving honey even before the prelactal feeds. Now, if one newborn presents with E. coli sepsis, one must think about the association between E. coli sepsis and galactosemia. Similarly, if one infant presents with Klebsiella sepsis, there are some association which has been found with hereditary fructose intolerance. So, if you found E. coli sepsis or Klebsiella sepsis in a case of neonatal cholestasis, you should think about the underlying metabolic problems like galactosemia or hereditary fructose intolerance. Tyrosinemia is one of the most common amino acid metabolic disorders where the patient may present with neonatal cholestasis and other features of IEM, that is inborn error of metabolism. Niemann-Pick type C usually presents with neonatal cholestasis. Paroxysmal disorders like Zellweger syndrome is one of the most common but less commonly found entity for neonatal cholestasis. Zellweger syndrome for PGTs, it is easy to remember that fluid everywhere, fluid in the brain, fluid in the heart, fluid in the lungs, and fluid in the peritoneal cavity. This is the common presentation or a typical presentation of Zellweger syndrome. Now, certain other intrahepatic causes are often sought for while investigating for a case of cholestasis. Alpha 1 antitrypsin deficiency, cystic fibrosis, neonatal iron storage disease, arteriohepatic dysplasia or Alagille syndrome, and progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis. PFIC, the most predominant types are type 1, 2, and 3. And there are certain other types like type 4, type 5, type 6. The clinching factor is GGT. GGT is often low or normal in case of PFIC 1 and 2, but it is certainly increased in case of PFIC 3. The patient presents with itching. Sometimes you will find an infant of 3 months or 4 months of age with cholestasis feature or late onset HDN like feature, and that little infant may show features of itching and nail marks all over the reachable part of the body. There are multiple molecular defects like disorders of canalicular secretion, complex of multi-organ disorders, bile acid biosynthesis or conjugation defects, and disorders of embryogenesis. Now coming to the extrahepatic causes, the most common cause is extrahepatic biliary atresia, then choledochal cyst, bile duct stenosis, choledocholithiasis, inspissated bile plug syndrome, spontaneous perforation of the bile duct. These are other entities. According to Espaghan or Naspaghan, the most common cause of neonatal cholestasis is biliary atresia. Then comes the monogenic disorders. Usually, previously, we used to think that neonatal hepatitis, idiopathic neonatal hepatitis, it causes most of the cases of cholestatic disease in newborns. But as more and more genetic tests are coming up, we are finding out that monogenic disorders are the causes which were previously stamped as idiopathic neonatal hepatitis. So idiopathic neonatal hepatitis entity has been now almost discarded as specific genetic diagnosis is available. So the presentation: jaundice, hepatomegaly, acolic stool, dark urine, and other signs and symptoms depending upon the specific disease process. Among these things, acolic stool is one of the most common and easily picked out entity which the healthcare worker or the parent should be warned against. If there is acolic stool, then one must think about the obstructive or surgical causes along with other medical causes. So if you take history, what are the points you should take in history in a case of neonatal cholestasis? One is obviously the family history among previous siblings, any sibling death, any consanguinity, any maternal infection. If fetal ultrasound is available, then you should look at the fetal ultrasound, past ABO, RH or RH disease, birth weight, any history of neonatal infection, any history of NICU admission, and procedures like umbilical venous catheterization followed by TPN, then bowel history, source of nutrition, and disposition. Now, in US and UK, it is common practice if one infant turns out after 2 weeks of life and who is exclusively breastfed, even if the patient is having acolic stool or cholestatic like features, you can wait for another 1 week, and then if the symptoms or the findings persist, then you should evaluate. But if the baby is exclusively bottle fed or partially bottle fed, then even at 2 weeks of life, they start investigating regarding the cholestatic disorders. Physical examination, obviously weight, length, occipitofrontal diameter, then global assessment of the nutritional status. This should be looked after. One of the most important examination is HINT, that is head, eye, and ENT examination. Head, if there is any dysmorphic features like Alagille syndrome, any eye changes, any ENT findings, then this should be kept into the medical records. As well as In chest and heart auscultation, one should look for any cardiac abnormality or features of congestive cardiopathy. In abdomen, uh, features of abdominal distension along with features or stigmata of chronic liver disease should be looked after. Then skin should be examined for presence of any bruising, petechiae, rashes, and neurological examination is one of the most important factor, because most of the chronic liver disease they present with acute exacerbation, and encephalopathy may be there. Never forget to look into the nappy. If one patient is admitted with neonatal cholestasis and you fail to look at the nappy for stool color, it is basically a kind of negligence. In several foreign countries, the stool charts are available, and you can compare the stool charts with your baby stool, which has very high sensitivity and specificity. Now coming to investigations, what are the investigations you are going to do? One is CBC with peripheral smear along with other sepsis markers like CRP, differential count. Then a complete liver function test, total and direct bilirubin, ALT, AST, alkaline phosphatase, GGT, PT-APTT, INR, and serum albumin. Now, what we measure by Diazo or Vandenberg method is the direct bilirubin or conjugated bilirubin. These terms are often synonymously used, but it is not the same. Direct bilirubin is in conjugated bilirubin, we measure the direct bilirubin as well as the delta bilirubin, which is attached covalently with the serum albumin. Now, ALT and AST. ALT is more specific for liver tissue injury or hepatocytic injury, but AST is also secreted from RBCs and myocytes. So, in hemolytic disorders or in case of muscle involvement, AST may be raised. Alkaline phosphatase is often secreted from the growing bones, and it has very low specificity in pediatric as well as infantile age group. GGT is a marker of obstruction, and it may be paradoxically low, as I have previously mentioned, in case of PFIC or bile acid synthesis defects. Uncorrectable PT-APTT INR, despite administration of vitamin K, often points towards alloimmune hepatic dysfunction, sepsis, and underlying metabolic problems. So if you find an infant with cholestasis with uncorrectable PT-INR, is in spite of administering vitamin K regularly, then you should think about these disorders. Serum albumin is obviously a marker of synthetic function of the liver. Then electrolytes, other sepsis screen, these are to be done as disline investigation. In second line test, you should consider ophthalmological examination, virological examination. Specifically, TOR screening is in today's practice is almost outdated, and you should look for ELISA or PCR test for active viral infections. Then urine and serum bile acid assay and specific metabolic assays like alpha-1 antitrypsin phenotyping, urine reducing substance, and GALT assay for galactosemia. This and should be done. To rule out cystic fibrosis, immunotrypsinogen study for neonatal screening and CFTR or sweat chloride tests are to be preferred. TSH is one of the tests which we cannot afford to miss, as it is a completely correctable and treatable cause of neonatal cholestasis. Among other tests, metabolic screening is to be done whenever available and you suspect that this baby might be having some inborn error of metabolism. Now coming to abdominal ultrasonography. What does the abdominal ultrasonography give in case of neonatal cholestasis? Specifically, the USG is meant for looking after the stigmata of biliary atresia, classically described as absence of gallbladder or irregularity of the gallbladder wall, or the triangular cord sign, which is often cited but seldom found. Then gallbladder length, any non-contraction of gallbladder even after oral feeding. But there are certain entities which has been mentioned in the latest guideline to look after as the marker of biliary atresia. I'll cite the three of them. One is increased hepatic artery diameter. Second is increased hepatic artery is to portal vein diameter ratio, and another is increased subcapsular blood flow. These three should be looked after whenever you are searching for biliary atresia in an ultrasonogram. But it is necessary to mention that the skill of the technician or the radiologist is very much essential to point out towards these entities. This is the classical triangular cord sign. The fibrotic cylindrical segment is seen here. There is large cholecystocele in the USG. This is Caroli's dot sign seen in Caroli's disease. One thing I should mention in this after this slide is that cholecystocele is often associated with biliary atresia. So it is always better to go for an intraoperative cholangiogram while operating for a large cholecystocele, because if it is missed, then the whole point of the surgery will be vague. Now, duodenal aspirate, it is often practiced in several setups. Even in our setup, sometimes it is practiced. But the recommendation to support this test is not that good, because even in case of medical jaundices, there might be intrahepatic cholestasis, and there might be failure to excrete the bile concentrate. HIDA scan is another thing which may or may not be done. If the patient presents early, it can be done. But if the patient presents later, but for pediatric medicine purpose, it is better to go for liver biopsy rather than go for a HIDA scan, because it is time consuming and also often of false positive or false negative values. Liver biopsy is the most important investigation, which is got accuracy of around 60% to 95%. One of two main things: the patient must have a normal coagulogram, that is normal PT, APTT, and INR, and the platelet count also should be normal. These two should be checked before doing an liver biopsy besides your serology screen. Complications sometimes occur. The rate of complication has been cited in several studies between 3% to 5%. This is the typical neonatal hepatitis histopathology. This is one of biliary atresia. You can see, you can appreciate the whole slide being of little brownish in color. The sensitivity is like 99% and specificity is almost 82 to 98% to pick up biliary atresia in case of histopathology slides. But even if you do histopathology, I must mention here that if you do early, sometimes you may miss the changes of biliary atresia even in case of histopathology slides. PAS positive diastase resistant globules, which is often given in DNV slides in examination. Now, exploratory laparotomy with intraoperative cholangiogram, it remains the gold standard for diagnosis of biliary atresia. Apart from that, percutaneous transhepatic cholangiogram, ERCP, MRCP, these can be done. Before going into the protocol or the algorithm, the new Espaghan and Naspaghan, they have classified biliary atresia in three groups. One is the non-syndromic group, which is around 80% in incidence. One is the syndromic variety with non-lateralization pathologies. Non-lateralization pathologies means the patient might have some genitourinary malformations. And the third is the biliary atresia with lateralizing pathologies like situs inversus, midline liver, midline spleen, splenenculi. These might be there. So when you are going for an ultrasonographic examination, you should also look for the hepatic, splenic, and intra-abdominal pathologies, which may be present concurrently along with your biliary atresia. Now, this is Indian Academy of Pediatrics guideline. This classifies the baby as sick or non-sick. If the baby looks sick, then you progress in one way. If the baby looks not sick, then you approach in a different way. If the baby looks sick, then you have to look for the sepsis screen and treat the infection and look for the changes or improvement in the results. If the sepsis screen is negative, then you should look for non-bacteriological sepsis like virological infections and sometimes underlying inborn error of metabolisms. But if the baby looks well, a well baby with neonatal cholestasis features, then you should look for pale stools. If the baby has pigmented stools, then it is less likely to be having biliary atresia. And if the baby has pale stool, then you should go for liver biopsy and other measures or other investigations to rule out surgical pathologies. Now, what to do if the patient presents before 6 weeks, after 6 weeks, after 90 days, or after 120 days? It is often seen that the baby presents quite late to our tertiary center with biliary atresia or other cholestatic symptoms. The usual presentation is quite late, which is probably the failure of our primary health setup to pick up the babies with this kind of persistence or fluctuating jaundices. So after 90 days or 120 days, there is no point of keeping the baby for investigations, and the baby should be straight away referred to a transplant center. Now, if the baby presents before 6 weeks, that is 1.5 months, then you can give some time for HIDA scan and go for liver biopsy and go for operative management. But if the baby presents after 6 weeks, then you should not waste any more time and straight away go for liver biopsy. Another thing regarding liver biopsy, the liver biopsy takes quite a lot of time in our center or in other centers in India. It takes around 7 to 10 days for a liver biopsy report to get it in your hand. So keep in your mind that even if you do liver biopsy, you are going to delay for about 7 days for the appropriate diagnosis and management. Now, treatment aspects. The most important treatment is nutrition. Often this is overlooked and often this is mismanaged. You should keep the baby in a state in which a surgeon can have a fruitful operative procedure. And also, the baby should not die of malnutrition or regarding complications of micronutrient deficiency. The baby should be supplemented with MCT based feeds, that is high energy diet, 200 kilocalorie per kg per day, which is twice the requirement of a normal baby. Protein should be 1 to 2 gram per kg per day, calories 2 to 3% from essential fatty acids, and vitamin supplementation should be continued till 3 months after resolution of jaundice. The suggested vitamin supplementation is vitamin A in oral form, 5,000 to 25,000 international unit per day. Vitamin D, 400 to 1200 international unit per day. Vitamin E, 50 to 400 international unit per day. Vitamin K, if you get it in oral form, which is pretty much available right now, you can give 2.5 twice weekly to 5 milligram per day. Water soluble vitamins you have to supplement in a dose of 1 to 2 times of the required or recommended dietary allowance. Along with that, calcium, phosphorus, zinc, magnesium, and elemental iron should be supplemented to prevent micronutrient deficiency. If the patient presents with pruritus, often you can see patients with neonatal cholestasis or PFIC, which presents a little bit later, like 5 months, 6 months, then you have to deal with the pruritus. Ursodeoxycholic acid is the first thing that comes into the mind, and you give it. Second is rifampicin, and third is phenobarbital. But rifampicin is not recommended nowadays, as it is a first-line anti-tubercular drug, and we should preserve it as much as possible. Specific treatment for metabolic disorders like galactosemia, fructosemia, and tyrosinemia, specific infant formulas are available. Specific therapy for virological infections you can give. For peritonitis or other superadded bacterial infections, you can treat it with gram-negative with a third generation cephalosporin along with aminoglycoside. No role of steroid in idiopathic neonatal hepatitis, which was previously being used in case of idiopathic neonatal hepatitis, and also management of acute liver failure. Ultimately, if the patient is having biliary atresia or other surgical causes, you should go for surgical management. I think the surgeons are more capable than us describing these procedures. I just want to highlight one thing here, that if you do Kasai Suzuki operation prior to 8 weeks, that is before 2 months, then the biliary re-establishment is seen in 80 to 90%. But if you do after 12 weeks, just 1 month gap, the re-establishment of bile flow is very less. It is less than 20%. But there is no cutoff for late referral. 75 to 100% of cases had cirrhosis at laparotomy in India, as average age at which medical attention is short is 4.5 weeks, and arrival at specialized center is 3.5 months, which is quite beyond the age where the baby can be salvaged. This should be kept in mind, and each and every baby which presents after 14 days of life with direct bilirubin more than 1 milligram per DL should be looked after and should be evaluated if you think so for any other cholestatic disorders. Thank you. Any questions?
Anirudh, there are certain observations.
Yes, sir.
Number one is that I wouldn't include choledocholithiasis in a neonatal jaundice because though we have seen, gallstone even at 1 month, it really
স্যার শোনা
would
যাচ্ছে না স্যার,
produce.
একটু জোরে বলতে হবে।
Ore baba re. Now, rarely would they produce
হ্যাঁ, এখন ঠিক আছে, এখন ঠিক আছে।
an obstructive jaundice due to choledocholithiasis, because even if you have seen a stone in the gallbladder in a 1 month age, the cystic duct being so narrow, usually they do not pass to obstruct the ample lobator. That's number one observation. So I wouldn't include choledocholithiasis in neonatal jaundice.
Okay.
Number two is that regarding biliary atresia, and you said that the obstructive jaundice there, you have said biliary atresia, you have said biliary hypoplasia and speciated bile syndrome, and you also mentioned choledococele and choledochal cyst.
Yes, sir.
Now, normally it is taken from the surgical point of view and the various papers that a cystic type of choledochal cyst is perhaps a cystic variety of biliary atresia.
1B probably, 1B probably.
Yeah, that is
if I
even because they are perhaps not choledochal cysts. In fact, I have done 2 in Institute of Child Health of newborn 3 weeks, and they were actually choledochal cysts, the lining itself, not choledochal cysts, sorry, it was biliary atresia. Now, the third point about investigation, I'm a strong proponent of duodenal intubation.
Yeah, I know that, sir.
The reasons are, there have been, see, it was proposed somewhere in France in 1970s, then, fell out of favor. But I found that having done about 200 biliary atresias, the advantage of duodenal intubation is that it's a bedside procedure. So you are doing your other investigations at the same time.
It is not wasting the time, right?
Yeah. Number two is that if your bile salt is absent in a duodenal aspirate, then you take it that it is a biliary atresia and you proceed accordingly. Okay? Now, if the bile salt is present, then you avoid a lot of laparotomies or, in the present day and age, a laparoscopy.
Right.
Now, regarding your gold standard of biliary atresia diagnosis being a peroperative cholangiogram,
right,
it can be done only in about 40% cases. And so that 40% cases are the only one that will show you which type of biliary atresia are you dealing with. The rest, you open up and then you continue with the standard procedure.
Right.
And when you do Kasai, you see, basically Kasai gives you a result not immediately. If you follow up a Kasai operation done at the golden, days,
period,
that we
right.
say, then also the bilirubin level to get down below 1 will take about a year. About a year. there is an initial drop in about a month's time, then there is a plateau, then it gradually goes down. And the enzymes take more than 2 years to get down to normal. But Kasai actually buys time. Most of the patients would require a liver transplant later, depending upon the degree of liver failure, which is totally unpredictable. So Kasai is not the final answer, but it actually buys
time buying procedure, right?
And secondly, nowadays, we the pediatric surgeons worldwide, we do not mind to operate on a patient who is just about 90 days or more old. Again, for the same logic that it is basically buying time.
Right.
Okay?
Thank you, sir.